Hello everyone, welcome to the Pennsylvania Earth Sciences Association and PISA Presents with the Geology of Caribbean Piracy and the Port Royal Earthquake. Now today we're looking into a special request from Mineral Fest, and if you have any special requests yourself, please contact us through the main page at Facebook. But first, a huge can't thank you enough to all of our viewers and followers on the various social media pages and YouTube. The channel has done absolutely great in the past few weeks, and we're seeing lots of people going back and forth in between the various pages, asking questions about the groups, even joining the group itself. Now, nonprofits absolutely thrive with the attention of new followers, new members, just really new life. So, folks like you, our viewers, are really a key reason as to why, the reason as to why we've been around as long as we have. So, thank you so very much for your support of not only PISA itself, but really just the physical sciences. And with that, let's set the stage for the 16th century and Caribbean geology and piracy. So now this was a time of empire building. All of these nations were just absolutely slogging it out over the seas, going back and forth, trying to see who can be top dog by sending their sailors and their ships after each other. Now, sometimes this did not turn out very well, obviously. Now, pirate means one who attacks. Pirates are seafaring persons that commit acts of violence and theft. In case you're wondering, a buccaneer is another early term for pirate. Some differentiate, but most do not. Now, if sanctioned by a government, a pirate becomes known as a quote privateer. So basically, if a particular government wanted to give a pirate permission to go after ships or properties of one of their enemies, they would give them letters known as letters of marque. Now, these letters would not, mind you, would not keep them from, say, being disciplined or really being sought after by that enemy empire. Really, it would just sort of give them permission and say, this individual, this John Smith, this Jane Addams, this whomever is acting on behalf of this nation. And it was a interesting and very dicey way to commit crimes on behalf of a large country. Now, privateers were more common in times of war, and pirates were more common in times of peace. There were pirates in ancient China, Egypt, Greece, and other cultures, as of course, sadly, still there are today. But the golden age of piracy is the time referencing pirates and privateers in the Caribbean from 1650 to about 1720. Now, the following is divided into about three sections. First of all, yes, there are going to be a couple of Pirates of the Caribbean movie references in this, and no, that is not a promotion of piracy itself. Pirates were nasty, brutish people. That is not promoting what they did. It is just promoting really just what people are familiar with. People are familiar with the movies and what happened in there and some of the fun moments in there. So let's just have some fun with that and enjoy that. And so, with that, folks, let's look at the Caribbean Sea and some of these islands that are right here. So, the sea itself is about 160 to 180 million years old. It was actually formed when Pangaea rifted. Now, that is just a very shockingly small amount of the actual amount of islands in the Caribbean. There are upwards of 7,000 islands in there. So it would be pretty easy just to say if, and I'm not promoting this, mind you, just to say if back in the day you were to say get a large ship and rob Empire X, and then to go away and hide. And there'd be lots of little hidey holes, lots of places for you to go around and hide, lots of little nooks and crannies. So that's what made one of the many reasons that made the Caribbean very popular for pirates. Lots of little places for you to hide, lots of places for you to quick dart in and out of when you're trying to get away from people. Now, another key part of this equation, a massive part of this equation, which honestly I'm not sure why historians don't take into account more. I think it's because they're not really as familiar with the geology and the science angle of it as much, is the currents. Now, here's something more close up about it right here. So you're looking at the Gulf Stream, the North Atlantic current. I mean, these are absolute beasts when you look at the size of them. The currents encircling the Caribbean made it very easy to get in, and the massive Gulf Stream and the North Atlantic current make it fast and easy to return to Europe. It was very quick to get in, very quick to get out, but not as fast to, say, be chased if you were to be pursued by somebody. It's just between the currents and all these different small land masses in the area. It was absolutely ideal for piracy. It was the ideal just climate for it, really, when you think about it. Now, this right here is, well, obviously it's coral. Now, the currents and its equatorial climate assisted the growth of these corals, and many of those 7,000 islands were in the beginning reefs or another related structure. But it wasn't all frosting and cupcakes. Now, while the Caribbean is fairly away from any major plate boundaries, it is still tectonically active from all the resultant forces. So now you can see here a little bit of what's going on with the plate boundaries. And now this is itself, of course, the map of the Caribbean Sea and its various islands. This is just to give you an idea of kind of just the geography of things and where we're going right here. So there is Jamaica is a little bit west of Haiti, which of course is sadly famously very tectonically active, as we know recently in the news. Cuba has also had its issues as well. Now we go on to Port Royal itself, a little bit of its history, and how it became to be known as the wickedest city in the world, which, with a name like that, you know things are going to get interesting. So I do love that quote. I will admit that. I do love that quote very, very much. Yeah, and no lies. Okay, now, so Port Royal was founded around 1494. That was formalized in 1509 in a spot ideally situated for maritime traffic. Now, how that happened is kind of an interesting story and is a very, very British thing. So, in 1655, the English took control of Jamaica and they wanted to really, really cheese off the Spanish. So basically what they did was they kind of put notices in a lot of papers and other things, and they're like, hey, pirates, privateers, everybody, you got a boat, you got whatever, come down to Jamaica, come down to Port Royal. We've got everything set up here. The town's been around for a while. We've got all this infrastructure already. It's great. Come down here. We'll stick you after the Spanish. It'll be wonderful. It's like a giant party town. It's really cool. And oddly enough, it really worked. I mean, you would think that something like that, people would kind of look at that and sort of be, It almost seems like today, if people hear of it, I'm not sure if they really do it anymore, but I know back when I was really, really little in the 80s, people like when police would try to catch somebody that say like had a missing warrant out on them, they would tell them that like they want a car or something and that they had to go to a precinct to go pick up their prize. It almost seems like something like that. And another really interesting thing that happened with was this was really Port Royal blossoming as a port town and as a town itself. Because even with the pirates, the pirates still brought a lot of industry because, yes, they were pirates. And again, yes, that came with all the resultant baggage from the piracy itself. But still, they brought with them shipbuilders, they brought with them blacksmiths, they brought with them even people like, say, brewers. Okay, let's face it, a lot of brewers and lots of other people, say tailors, just the general, the to and fro, the various industries that need to accompany that many people going about their daily lives. And so the city became a very well renowned port and very popular for immigration. Now, that little kidney bean shaped spot right there at the top, that's actually Kingston Harbor. Now, to the left hand side of that, that is actually where Port Royal is situated. So, that region is the seventh largest natural harbor in the world. So, that really gives you an idea of just how massive this area was in terms of its importance as a port. I mean, there was a lot of maritime traffic going in and out of here already that was accustomed to this area. It was one of those places that sailors knew readily how to get in and out of. Now, one of those sailors was a Welshman, a pirate privateer. It's complicated. He had letters of marque, but it was one of those things where it was kind of sus. Things might have been forged, but really, here it's neither tit for tat. Sir Henry Morgan, as in, yes, the guy that they named the rum after. Now, Sir Henry Morgan was indeed a sir. He was knighted for his acts against the Spanish. Now, basically, he was actually named Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica for his acts against the Spanish, but he grew to be shocked by the major city that he governed. And when you scare Henry Morgan, that's not a good thing. Now, he did attempt to reform Port Royal. He tried up until his death in 1688, but you can pretty much imagine how far he got with that. It didn't work very good. Yeah, he really didn't really manage to accomplish that much. Now, this is Fort Charles. This is one of the major fortresses in Port Royal. It's the only major fortress surviving in Port Royal. It's actually also, too, the major architectural inspiration for the fortress that they showed in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. While obviously it's not right next to the water, and at any rate, somebody can't artistically faint into it from, a corset fit, but that's an urban legend in itself. The biggest legend about that whole movie is the simple fact that, well, the movies themselves begin in 1728 in Port Royal, at which time a lot of these buildings were, underwater. So, the Port Royal earthquake of 1692 is also known as the Great Jamaica earthquake, which, when you're known as that, you know that things are going to get bad. So the outline of the 1692 shoreline is in the red. The outline post earthquake is in the blue. If you look where it says Port Royal earthquake 1692, beneath the T and the H going down, Governor's Mansion. That is where Elizabeth Swann, so Keira Knightley's character, that is where her house was. So you can see in the red, yes, it's still on the coast. So okay, that much is accurate. And then you look where the blue was, and it's like, yeah, things are slightly different, folks, to give you an idea of just how devastating this actual earthquake was. Now, we're going to actually go into what happened here and just really what went on to just destroy this place, just such a populous city, and what absolutely leveled it. So at the time, 1692, Port Royal is the second largest English speaking city. I mean, it had an absolutely atmospheric rise. It was actually only behind Boston, which is amazing. And it was indeed known as the wickedest city in the world. It was also known by various other names like Sodom and Gomorrah. the Sodom of the West, a couple other places. Now, over 1 in 4 buildings are either a bar or something else. And as this is a family page, I won't say what that something else is, but the grown-ups in the audience can get the hint. And over here we have a map of the various fault zones in the area. And while the ultimate fault that was the one that snapped that caused the earthquake can never really be guessed at, the key thing is that there are a lot of numerous strike slip faults in the area connected to major ones, and the major one that they think was responsible was this one, the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault Zone, with a combination of these various strike slip faults coming off of it. So that one with the other strike slip fault ones just kind of snapped, and yeah, things got scary. So, very, very famous series of witness statements are recorded by two individuals. One, Dr. Emmanuel Heath, sorry, that is supposed to be Heath, who is the Anglican rector in the town, and also one, John White, who is the head of the town council. So, this started on June the 7th of 1692 at 11:40. So, tremors start. And Heath turns to White and Heath goes, "Lord, sir, what is this?" And White says, "It is an earthquake. Be not afraid. It will soon be over." Now, this leads a question: how aware were citizens of earthquakes? White's comments make it seem like citizens were bored of them, but a lot of various accounts and books will tell you that people in Port Royal pretty much had no idea what an earthquake was. And that kind of led to folks almost like kind of, I hate to say, kind of coming out and sort of like stupidly going out into danger. But the problem is that if you're going out and being, it's an earthquake, don't worry, people will, it'll be over with soon. It kind of gives you an idea of a sense of complacency that people knew what the earthquakes were and they were bored with them. So he said that he saw, quote, "the earth open and swallow up a multitude of people, and the sea mounting in upon us over the fortifications." Now, built only 15 miles from Kingston, Port Royal had been constructed on a spit. So basically, they didn't have enough land to build the structures that they wanted to build, folks. And they just kept going out to what passed for the coast and just like kind of bucketing out whatever water they could and building like, yeah, that sand looks reasonably dry, and just building more and more structures out on this sand and gradually expanding the coast more and more and more. And obviously that's never a safe thing to do, as anybody that lives in a coastal town can tell you. And but they kept doing it, and at times rather hurriedly, which of course is never a good thing as well. Now, the absolute doom of Port Royal and a lot of other towns, like a key famous one, is San Francisco in 1906. The bane of San Francisco during that time as well was a phenomenon called liquefaction, which is where unconsolidated sands are shaken so hard they densely compact. Now, basically, so imagine folks, like, it helps when I tell small kids this. It helps when I tell them, if you imagine the sand in, say, like a plastic cup. So, say that you have some dense, moist sand in a plastic cup, and you shake it so hard, and it's like you can see through the cup, and you see it because you shake it so hard. It's like the sand settles to the bottom and the water goes back up to the top. It helps to visualize it, if that helps. That's why I tell kids to do it in a cup. And that's kind of what liquefaction is. These unconsolidated sands get shaken so hard they densely compact, and the compaction results in the ground appearing to move in a wave and this water just rushing in on them. Now, that resulted in just a devastating effect upon Port Royal, for they were dealing with their big one. This was a 7.5 on the moment magnitude scale with 3 shocks of increasing severity over barely a 3-minute time. I mean, this was devastating to them. Now, Port Royal did not have many streets. I mean, look at that. That's the map. I mean, look at that. You can pretty much stand at one end, throw a ball, and hit the other end. Now, and most of the populace lived in very basic housing. Very, very basic housing right there. Now, the city's many, many poor lived in simple wooden structures, but the English in power, in other words, the one that had money, chose to reconstruct what they were familiar with: large multi story brick homes along narrow streets. Now, this may sound crazy, but the first Pirates movie got something very, very right in the scene when the pirates are coming back into Port Royal, and like Will is thinking that they're coming to kidnap Elizabeth Swann, and so he's like fighting with them in the streets, and they're showing all of those narrow streets with those narrow houses kind of like leaning almost over each other. That's how Port Royal was really constructed. You had a lot of these narrow brick houses that were kind of like stuck in amongst each other in the English section of town. Now, so you have these streets that are right here, and what happened was, to begin with, warehouses along the shoreline sank immediately. So there went a lot of the money, a lot of the industry, a lot of the ability for people to kind of bankroll rebuilding if theoretically the chance had existed. Now, one of the major streets to go immediately was Thames Street, also to High Street, which was the major street. I mean, it went from pretty much one end to the other. Also, too, there was Queen Street as well. Now, the major forts that sank were Fort James right there and Fort Carlisle as well. Certain aspects of them, certain structural aspects, from what we can tell from various residual records, also kind of survived in the Pirates movie going back and forth, but still, I mean, all the major structures just minus minus Fort Charles. Fort Charles was the only structure that survived really reasonably intact. And well, as the church tower crumbled, because those two gentlemen that were talking earlier, they were speaking by the church tower, the Palisado Cemetery, well, accounts vary, but one of the words that they use is sank. Now, speaking of the cemetery, remember Henry Morgan? Well, accounts differ, but his burial grounds, which was that particular cemetery, were very greatly affected, with stories saying it either sank or slid into the ocean. I mean, accounts are very, very differing on this. Now, there are various reports, again, on just Morgan. Now, some of the stories even say that Morgan, quote, the word is popped out of the ground, and he just went right in the ocean. Now, whether or not the earthquake literally yeeted Henry Morgan out into the Atlantic or not, that isn't literally as important as the amount of people that literally did die in here. Now, not all the citizens of Port Royal were pirates. As many as 38% or even more of the 6,500 to 10,000 persons living here were enslaved. Now, these individuals' lives were centered in roughly 2,000 buildings. So these 2,000 buildings stuck together very, very tight, shoddy construction on very poor land. This was a recipe for absolute disaster here, and 2/3 of the 51-acre city sunk with just the main shock. Within 2 minutes, 90 to 95% was gone. I mean, these folks didn't have a chance. I know that's a cliche in disaster movies, but with this, it was true. These people did not have a chance whatsoever. Now, this is indeed a photo, obviously. This is a photo from another city in Jamaica. This is just for illustrative purposes, I'd like to clarify. Now, over 20 ships were capsized in the harbor. That had a couple other effects in of itself. Again, that also hampered relief efforts because how can you get people in and out of the harbor? How can you get people rescued? How can you get rescuers into Port Royal? And also, too, people were noticing, hmm, why is the water going back like that? And up to nearly 15 miles away, the sea was receding by 900 feet to roughly a mile, and it returned as a tsunami just over 6 foot high. Now, there he goes. Now, while 6 feet high may not sound like much, you have to keep in mind that when this city is already absolutely devastated between the earthquakes, the liquefaction, everything else, when you have a 6 foot wave that's moving pretty fast, just going on top of everything, it's just like fine. I mean, just it's one of those moments where you just kind of like bend over and it's, yeah, okay, I'm finished. I'm toast. I accept it now. Now, that's still just now there with the wave knocking the ship over. That actually did happen. So the HMS Swan was a ship that was carried over the city, and according to some accounts, it was either deposited atop several roofs on the western part of Jamaica or it was carried clear across. And the tenacity of the ship, the fact that it was able to survive that, because whether or not it was deposited on top of these roofs or on the western part, it was done so intact according to myth. And that tenacity is actually how Keira Knightley's character Elizabeth Swann got her name. They named her actually after this boat that survived the Port Royal earthquake. I mean, odd things, but I guess you've got to find a positive in something so ghastly. Now, 2,000 people died immediately and a further 3,000 died after. The nearby towns of Kingston and Spanish Town both suffered very heavy losses. Landslides were common during and after, with the most notorious one being the Judgment Cliff landslide. It's still studied today by geologists in the area. Now, damming all nearby rivers, it led to an absolute cessation of relief efforts. I mean, they couldn't go in and out in the harbor. They couldn't go in and out of the rivers now. So everybody was just stuck. Now, Fort Charles, as we've already said, was one of the very few buildings to survive. Now, in 1959, they were doing an archaeological excavation off the shore, and they found a watch with its hands pointing to 11:43 a.m. That confirmed what earlier accounts had said, which was the shocks had started at 11:40 and everything just ended very cataclysmically at 11:43. Now, despite trying to rebuild the town, a fire struck on January 9th of 1703 with several hurricanes in a row afterwards. I mean, subsequent hurricanes afterwards. Port Royal yeah, they just really didn't have it in them to stay there. The seat of government eventually was just moved to Kingston once they finally got to admit, yeah, we need to go over there now. And attempts are underway to make Port Royal a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which I truly hope that they are able to do. That building right there is a rather famous tourist attraction there from a recent tectonic event. It basically was able to sink partially into the ground. And that is one of the many attractions that you can find at Port Royal, although I don't mean to say attraction in a demeaning sense. One of the many things that you can go to there and learn about this absolutely marvelous town, a time capsule in a geologic sense, because that's what it is right now. It's actually a very popular site for geotourism and also archaeology as well. So, thank you very much, folks, for joining us today. Have a lovely rest of your day, and goodbye now.